Ted can be very useful in many ways to many people. Living, gone from us, would be like taking a part of all of us and throwing it away.
24th July, 1979, Louise Bundy takes the stand in court moments before her son, Ted Bundy, is sentenced to death. Louise loved her son, even when the evidence stacked up, even when the world squirmed at what Ted did, and she held on to that love for years until the tapes surfaced, until she heard her son confess in his own voice to the unthinkable.
In fact, up until Saturday, I didn't believe any of it.
This is a twisted reality no parent ever wants to face. But here are 8 more moments when parents find out their kid is a serial killer. Brian Cohey's mother. In February 2021, 21-year-old Brian Cohey committed one of the most gruesome murders in recent American memory. His victim was a 69-year-old homeless man named Warren Barnes, who was asleep near Crosby Avenue when Brian approached. But this wasn't just a killing. It was a ritual of violence. Cohey murdered Barnes, then decapitated, dismembered, and mutilated his body in ways that defy comprehension. He took parts of the man back home, including his head and hands, and stored them in his bedroom closet. And that's where his mother, Terry Cohey, found them and immediately called 911.
Oh my God, I can't believe it.
At least it's not me in that car, you know?
I can't believe it.
Got it.
Oh my God.
That moment wasn't a turning point in an investigation. It was the investigation. Terry's call to the police triggered the unraveling of a case that would shake their family and their community forever. Investigators would later discover dashcam footage placing Brian near the scene of the crime. They'd find journals, digital evidence, and even a confession. Brian admitted to targeting homeless individuals, believing no one would miss them. He didn't act out of rage. He planned it. He hunted. And he brought trophies home to the place where his mother made dinner, folded laundry, and once tucked him into bed. In court, Brian's defense pointed to severe mental illness, but the jury wasn't convinced. They found him sane, methodical, aware, and fully responsible. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Outside the courtroom, Terry spoke softly to cameras, offering deep apologies to Warren Barnes' family and the community. She didn't deny what her son had done. She didn't defend him. But you could still see it in her eyes, the disbelief, the heartbreak, and the question that will haunt her forever. How did I raise a monster? And that's the same question that haunted Stephen Grieveson's mother after she found out her son murdered 4 teenage boys. Stephen Grieveson's mother. Stephen John Grieveson, known as the Sunderland Strangler, murdered 4 teenage boys between 1990 and 1994 in Sunderland, England. His victims, young, vulnerable, and full of potential, were strangled, hidden, and forgotten until investigators began connecting the dots. In 1996, Grieveson was convicted of 3 of the murders. And then, 17 years later, in 2013, justice caught up to him again. He was found guilty of killing 14-year-old Simon Martin, a boy he'd murdered back in 1990, 3 years before the other victims. By then, Grieveson had already become a ghost behind the concrete walls of HMP Full Sutton, a maximum security prison in Yorkshire. A life sentence stacked on top of a life sentence, stacked on top of 2 more. There would be no release. Not now, not ever. But far from the courtroom, far from the prison gates, someone still held onto the boy he used to be. His mother, Kathy Grieveson. In a raw interview with The Guardian, Kathy painted a picture of a fractured home and a child slowly slipping through the cracks. He was a really loving boy, she said. But she also admitted that things went wrong early. At just 11, Stephen was sent to a children's home, where he was later sexually abused. Kathy blamed herself. I felt bad when he was sent away, like I might not have brought him up properly. She didn't sugarcoat her past either. I wasn't always there for them. I used to go to the bingo and that. There's no point lying. That's what I did. But she drew a line. I didn't turn him into a killer. Kathy didn't defend his crimes. In fact, her words were chillingly honest. I know Stephen will not come out. Certainly not when I'm alive, and I'd be terrified if he did, for what he might do. Still, despite it all, the fear, the shame, the unbearable truth, she ended with a sentence only a mother could say, but I still love him. I could never turn against him, because he's my son, and he's still a mammy's boy. Those are words that Howell Donaldson's parents can relate to, even though their son killed 4 innocent people. Trey Donaldson's parents. In 2017, The neighborhood of Seminole Heights in Tampa, Florida fell into a state of fear. 4 people were murdered, shot in cold blood. No warning, no connection, no clear motive. The killer was a young man named Howell Emanuel Donaldson III, known to his friends and family as Try. Just 24 years old at the time, Trey wasn't some drifter or shadowy loner. He was a former college basketball player, a guy with friends, a job, and a seemingly normal life. To the outside world, he didn't look like a killer, but between October and November of 2017, he became known as the Seminole Heights Killer, randomly gunning down 4 innocent people across a 6-week span. When police finally arrested him, the public gasped, but no one was more stunned than his family. His mother Rosita claimed he lived at home and was in every night by 5 p.m. But in truth, he had been drifting between motels and friends' couches during the killings. The Donaldsons, Hal and Rosita, shut themselves away. They canceled business at their local hair academy, Sheer Excellence, and went into hiding, blindsided by the reality that their son was being called a serial killer. Still, they didn't abandon him. They hired a prominent attorney and publicly stood by Try. Their message was clear: we love our son, and we will support him even in the darkest of times.
We love our son.
Just wanted to let him know we love him.
Let him know we love him.
But they also extended a message to the victims' families. Our hearts go out to the families and the loss that they have. In April 2023, 6 years after the murders, Try Donaldson finally confessed. He pleaded guilty to all 4 murders. To avoid the death penalty, he accepted a plea deal: 4 life sentences, no chance of parole. And just like that, one of Tampa's most chilling chapters came to a quiet courtroom end. This next parent heartbreak was so painful, he wrote a memoir about his son. Jeffrey Dahmer's parents. Between 1978 and 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 men. He'd lure them to his Milwaukee apartment with charm alcohol and promises drug them, torture them, and take Polaroids to preserve the violence. He wasn't caught until 1991. And when police entered his apartment, they found a literal house of death. It shocked the nation, traumatized families, and left one lingering question: how did no one see this coming? Jeffrey's parents, Lionel Dahmer and Joyce Flint, had asked themselves that same question 1,000 times. Joyce once told MSNBC he was a normal young boy, but Lionel, a research chemist, took a more introspective route. He wrote a memoir titled A Father's Story, trying to trace the origins of evil in his own son.
Well, the only signs that I saw were shyness and reluctance to engage in social interactions, that sort of thing, but really no overt signs.
In an interview with Oprah, Lionel admitted, still looking back, he remembered Dahmer's childhood interest in dead animals, the way he'd collect bones, the strange curiosity. He spoke openly about his guilt, wondering if his emotional distance had played a role. Lionel even considered whether something genetic, something unchangeable had driven Jeffrey to kill.
I considered all kinds of things. Was it environmental, genetic? Was it perhaps medications that were taken at the time of, in the first trimester? Was it the effect of, the popular subject now, media violence?
But he never imagined the full scale of it until the trial. That's when it all came out, every photo, every gruesome detail. Jeffrey Dahmer was sentenced to 16 consecutive life terms, but he didn't serve long. In 1994, he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate. In the end, Lionel Dahmer forgave his son, not because he excused what happened, but because he believed in a deeper kind of mercy. He never stopped loving him, but he never stopped hurting either. That's totally different from what Peter Sutcliffe's father said and felt when he found out his son was the Yorkshire Ripper. Peter Sutcliffe's father.
I probably think of him much as you do now, but I also remember him as he was, which was completely foreign to what he eventually became and what he is now.
John Sutcliffe was at work when the news broke, "Your son is the Yorkshire Ripper." He asked his manager for permission to leave because his life in that instant had shattered. Peter Sutcliffe had killed 13 women and tried to kill 7 more. The brutal murders gripped England in fear for years and was left trying to understand how his son could do this. In the documentary, Killer in the Family, John opens up. No dramatics, no denial, just a father speaking through shame and heartbreak. He should have hanged, he says, plainly, not out of cruelty, but out of truth. And yet, he still talks to Peter, not in person. He doesn't visit anymore, but every 2 weeks they speak on the phone. Just small talk, just enough to keep that faint connection alive. John says he still loves his son, not for what he did, but for who he is, his child, the quiet one, the only one of his 6 kids who still checks in with him. That kind of love is complicated. It's messy. It's not forgiveness. It's something else, a lifelong burden of guilt, regret, and bloodlines you can't erase. Peter Sutcliffe died in 2020, but for John, the sentence had already been lifelong. This next parent was so heartbroken, all she could do to cope was hold on to her daughter's past. Joanna Dennehy's mother. In 2013, Britain met a new face of evil. Joanna Dennehy, 31 years old, went on a 10-day stabbing spree. She attacked 5 men, killed 3, and 2 survived by sheer luck. When asked why, her answer chilled the nation. "I killed to see how I would feel. Then it got more-ish." But for her mother, Kathleen Dennehy, that monster wasn't the girl she raised. Not even close. "The girl that killed those people is not my daughter," she said. "My daughter's that nice 16-year-old that never came home." Kathleen remembers a sensitive child, a girl who cried over worms, who once tucked them into bed with her so they wouldn't die in the cold. That was Joanna once. The murders, the headlines, the courtroom smirks, Kathleen couldn't reconcile any of it. To her, that person was someone else entirely. But denial doesn't change reality. Joanna Dennehy is now one of just 3 British women ever sentenced to life without parole. And Kathleen is left clinging to memories of a daughter frozen in time. The sweet girl who disappeared long before the killings ever began. And that's exactly what Ted Bundy's mom did. Ted Bundy's mother. Even after the trials, the headlines, and the horror stories, Louise Bundy never gave up on her son. To her, Ted wasn't a predator. He was her boy. The smart, polite, and well-dressed son who'd grown up in a loving working-class home. He wasn't capable of those crimes. He couldn't be. That illusion held strong until the tapes. Journalists Stephen Michaud and Hugh Ainsworth had spent months interviewing Bundy in prison. What started as subtle probing turned into something darker. They didn't just get Ted to talk. They got him to confess, tricking him into revealing the twisted details of his murders by having him speak in third person, as if describing the acts of someone else. The result was chilling, a raw, unfiltered window into a killer's mind. Before the tapes were ever released to the public, Michaud felt an obligation. He brought them to Ted's parents. He sat in their home hit play and let the recordings speak for themselves. Louise listened, at first in silence, then with strange squeaking noises, not sobs, not screams. Something harder to explain, like her brain couldn't process what her ears were hearing. And then she stood up, clapped her hands, and with an eerily cheerful tone asked, "Who's for apple pie and ice cream?" That moment still haunts those who were there, even with Ted's own voice describing how he lured women, struck them, handcuffed them, and killed them. Louise refused to believe it. Up until the moment he died in the electric chair, she maintained his innocence. There was no abuse in Ted's past, no obvious warning signs. He didn't come from a broken home. That perhaps made it even harder for Louise to accept that evil doesn't always grow in darkness. Sometimes it grows in plain sight. And behind every crime scene, he left behind every missing daughter and grieving family, was a mother who believed he couldn't possibly be capable of such horror. Next up, the mother of Todd Kohlhepp, who defended her son to the very end. Todd Kohlhepp's mother. Todd Kohlhepp's criminal history began early. At 15, he kidnapped and assaulted a teenage girl. He spent 14 years in prison before moving to South Carolina, where beginning in 2003, he would carry out a series of murders over the next decade. In total, Kohlhepp was convicted of killing 7 people. Among the most well-known cases was the 2016 discovery of Kayla Brown, found chained inside a shipping container on his property. 3 bodies were buried nearby. Others were linked to a mass shooting at a motorcycle shop years earlier. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Kohlhepp's mother, Regina Tague, continued to stand by her son.
It's not like he went out daily and killed somebody. There was a lot of time between the first ones and then the others, which I know that doesn't mean much to the families, and I'm sorry. But he wasn't a serial killer.
Tague described her son as intelligent, sensitive, and generous. She believed the killings stemmed not from calculation, but from emotional injury. According to her, the shooting at the bike shop was a response to humiliation.
They embarrassed him. And you know, anybody, I don't care who you are, and whether you have a temper or you don't have a temper, nobody wants to be embarrassed. And that's hard to work out from. After
after telling you that he killed 7 people, what did you say to him?
How could you do this?
Over time, this narrative of hurt and reaction became her framework for understanding what had happened. Even after her son admitted to all 7 murders and reportedly threatened her, she maintained that the crimes were acts of rage, not cold-blooded serial violence. Tague continued to speak with Todd, even as his past became the subject of national headlines. Her view never quite aligned with the court's or the public's. To her, the son she knew wasn't the same man described in the police reports. And yet Todd Kohlhepp now serves 7 consecutive life sentences. Be sure to subscribe and click on this next card on your screen.